My name's Esme. I'm 33 years old. And last month, I found out my parents gave my brother $230,000 while calling me a failure. That one discovery changed everything I ever believed about love, family, and fairness. I stopped calling them after that night, and what happened next still keeps me awake. Tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life family stories of betrayal, revenge, and emotional courage. It happened on a Thursday night, the kind of quiet evening that feels ordinary until it isn't. I had just gotten home from work, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the couch with a bowl of leftover pasta. The TV hummed in the background, one of those reality shows I barely paid attention to anymore. I was tired. My phone buzzed, and out of habit, I opened Facebook. That's when I saw it. A post from my brother, Jason, smiling proudly in front of a 2-story beige house with a wide porch and a shiny sold sign in the yard. His caption said, "Finally a homeowner. Couldn't have done it without Mom and Dad." At first, I thought it was a joke. Jason was never good with money. He'd switched jobs 5 times in the last 4 years, landscaping, flipping cars, even trying to sell homemade candles for a few months. None of it lasted. So when I saw that photo, my stomach tightened. I scrolled through the comments. Hundreds of them. "Wow, congrats. So proud of you, Jason." And then one that stopped me cold. "So sweet of your parents to help you buy your first place. What a blessing. Help him buy his house." I set my phone down and stared at the wall. The air in my apartment suddenly felt heavier. The only thing I could hear was the clock ticking above my kitchen counter. It didn't make sense. Just last year, when my car broke down, I asked my parents for a small loan, just enough to cover the repair, so I could get to work. Mom told me, "We're trying to save right now. Honey, maybe ask Jason. He's better with money." That memory burned. I'd swallowed my pride then, thinking maybe they were struggling. But clearly, they weren't. I picked up my phone again and stared at the post. There it was, "Couldn't have done it without Mom and Dad." I clicked on Mom's profile out of pure impulse, and there she was commenting with heart emojis and a message that read, "You deserve every bit of it, sweetheart. We're so proud of the man you've become." No message like that had ever been written for me. Not once. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they just helped him with a down payment. A few thousand, nothing major. But a few hours later, curiosity got the better of me. I called Mom. She answered after a long pause, her voice soft, almost distracted. "Hi, Esme. Everything okay?" "I just saw Jason's post," I said, trying to sound casual. "He bought a house." "Oh, yes. Isn't it wonderful? He's finally settling down," she said. "He deserves some stability." "Yeah, that's great," I replied slowly. He said he couldn't have done it without you and Dad. "Did you help him with the house?" Silence. The kind that fills your chest before it breaks you. "Well," she finally said, "we gave him some money to get started. He's had a rough time, lately." "How much money?" I asked, my heart pounding. Another pause. "About 230,000. "Why?" My throat went dry. "You gave him $230,000? Mom, where did that even come from?" "It's our money, Esme," she said firmly. "We wanted to invest in someone who will make something of himself. Jason has potential. He just needs a push." I sat there in stunned silence, gripping the phone like it might explode in my hand. "Mom," I said quietly, when I needed help with my car, "you said you didn't have enough." Her tone hardened. "You've always been fine on your own, Esme. You don't need handouts. You're responsible. Jason isn't." I let out a bitter laugh. "So you reward irresponsibility?" "Don't twist my words," she snapped. "You've always been difficult, always questioning everything. We're just doing what's best for our family." When she said, Our family, I realized she didn't mean me. Not really. After I hung up, I just sat there, staring at the dark TV screen. My reflection looked different, tired, small, and oddly hollow. I thought about every holiday dinner where Jason bragged about his half-baked business ideas while Mom refilled his plate. Every time Dad told me, "You should be more like your brother." Every phone call that ended with, "We're so proud of Jason." The truth had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the small space between my couch and kitchen, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about what it meant. They saw me as a backup plan, the responsible daughter, the one who would never need saving, never cause trouble, never be chosen first. At around 2 in the morning, I scrolled back to Jason's post again. He'd added new photos, the living room, the backyard, a close-up of a brand new truck parked in the driveway. Caption, "Fresh start, new beginnings, big dreams ahead." I couldn't look at it anymore. I deleted the app, tossed my phone onto the couch, and turned off the lights. But I couldn't turn off the feeling. Over the next few days, everything felt different. When my coworkers laughed in the break room, I smiled, but I wasn't really there. My mind kept drifting back to that phone call. I started to notice small things. How people at work talked about their families with warmth, with affection. I couldn't relate anymore. My family suddenly felt like strangers wearing familiar faces. I tried calling my dad once, hoping maybe he'd see things differently. He didn't. "Esme," he said, "your brother's had a tough time. We wanted to give him a chance. You've always been stable. You don't need our help." I asked quietly, "And what do I get?" He sighed. "You get to say you never needed us." That line hit harder than he probably meant it to. It was true. I had never needed them because they'd never been there to begin with. A week later, my friend Marissa invited me over for coffee. She noticed I'd been quiet lately. "What's going on?" she asked gently. I told her everything. The money, the phone call, the way my parents had spoken to me, like I was some distant relative, not their daughter. Marissa shook her head slowly. "That's brutal, Esme. I don't even know what to say." "I just don't understand," I said. "I worked hard, did everything they asked, tried to make them proud. But apparently that's not enough unless you're Jason." She leaned back and said something that stuck with me. "Maybe you spent too long trying to earn love that was supposed to be unconditional." Those words echoed in my head the entire drive home. That night, I went through old photo albums, birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations. Jason was always in the center, grinning wide, arms around both of them. I was always at the edge, half smiling, half forgotten. For the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. I'd been living in the shadow of favoritism my entire life, and I had mistaken it for love. A few nights later, I got another notification. Jason again. This time, it was a video, him giving a tour of his new house. He walked through each room, bragging about his plans, thanking Mom and Dad again for believing in him. The comments flooded in. "You're lucky to have such amazing parents." Lucky. I stared at that word until my eyes blurred. Then I closed my laptop, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking. I whispered to myself, "I'm done." Not out of anger, but exhaustion. That was the night I decided I'd stop calling them. No more updates, no more visits, no more pretending that being the strong one was some badge of honor. For the first time in years, I turned my phone off completely. The silence that followed wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew this. I wasn't going to chase a place in a family that never really saw me. And even though I didn't realize it yet, that one Facebook post, that smiling photo under the caption, "Finally a homeowner," was the beginning of everything that would change my life. The first night after I saw that post, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing my mother's voice, that soft, careful tone she only used with my brother, Marcus. I used to think it was love, but now it sounded like favoritism, wrapped in fake warmth. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee untouched beside me, my phone screen still glowing with that Facebook post. "Congratulations, Marcus, on your new business," my mother had written. "We're so proud to help our son achieve his dream." And there it was, the photo of my parents handing him a check. The caption said $230,000. My stomach twisted. I read the comments, family, friends, church people, even old neighbors, all flooding in with heart emojis and praise. "You raised him so well. What amazing parents. Such a blessing." Not one person knew that a year ago, when I'd asked for a small $5,000 loan to start my own baking business, my father told me, "We don't fund lost causes." Esme. I thought about texting Marcus right then, but what could I even say? "Congrats on cashing in your golden ticket." Instead, I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and told myself I'd confront my parents calmly. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to understand why. That evening, I called my mom. She picked up after 2 rings. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, cheerfully. "Did you see Marcus's post? Isn't that exciting?" I froze for a moment. "Yeah, I saw it." There was a pause, that small kind of silence where, the next words will change something forever. "Mom," I said carefully, "did you really give him $230,000? Her tone softened, but not kindly, almost rehearsed. "Oh, Esme, don't make a big deal out of it. You know your brother's starting a business. We just wanted to help him get on his feet." I clenched my jaw. "I asked for help last year, remember? You told me you couldn't afford to help either of us." "Well," she sighed, "your brother's plan is more stable, honey. You know how your little baking thing didn't really take off?" The words, "your little baking thing," cut like a knife. I bit my lip hard enough to taste metal. It didn't take off because I never got the chance to start it, Mom. "Sweetheart," she said, that word again, soft and smothering, "you've always been too emotional about money. Marcus knows how to plan, how to think long term." "Are you saying I don't?" I interrupted. "I'm saying," she continued, "Marcus earned our trust. You've always been a bit impulsive." Something broke inside me then, not with anger, but with clarity. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about who they believed in. And it was never me. "Thanks for clearing that up," I said flatly. "At least now I know where I stand." Before she could answer, I hung up. My hands were shaking, so bad, I almost dropped the phone. That night, Marcus called. I ignored the first 2 attempts, but he kept calling, so I finally answered. "Esme," he said, sounding irritated, "Mom said you were upset about something." "Upset?" I laughed bitterly. "No, Marcus, I'm just impressed. You managed to get $250,000 from Mom and Dad. That's quite an achievement." "Esme, come on," he said defensively. "It's not like that. They offered to help me. I didn't ask." "That makes it worse," I snapped. "They just offered you that kind of money while I was told I wasn't worth a risk." He sighed. "You're always making things dramatic. Why does everything have to be about you?" I froze. The tone, the dismissal, it was the same way our father spoke to me. "I'm not making it about me," I said quietly. "I'm making it about fairness." "Well, life's not fair, Esme," he said, his voice calm in that condescending way only he could manage. "You could have done something useful with your degree instead of baking cupcakes." My pulse pounded in my ears. "You mean the degree I paid for myself while you lived rent-free at home?" He didn't reply, just A small exhale, the sound of someone who thought the conversation was beneath them. "I have to go," he muttered. "Don't make this a thing." "It already is a thing," I whispered, but he'd already hung up. The next few days felt like walking through fog. I went to work, smiled when I needed to, laughed when people expected me to. But inside, I was unraveling. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected another message from my mom or brother, maybe even an apology. Instead, there was silence. Then, 3 days later, my mom texted, "We're having dinner on Sunday. Marcus is bringing someone special. Don't bring up money again, okay? Let's just have a nice evening." The audacity of it made me laugh out loud. Don't bring up money again. Like it was some childish tantrum I'd thrown. Still, a part of me, the naive, still hopeful daughter, wanted peace. So I went. Sunday dinner smelled like rosemary chicken and nostalgia. The same dining table we'd eaten at every Sunday for years sat gleaming under warm light. My mother had even made my favorite mashed potatoes. But I noticed something immediately. There was an extra place sitting beside Marcus. When he arrived, he wasn't alone. A tall, polished woman in a sleek navy dress walked in beside him, smiling politely. "Everyone," Marcus said proudly, "this is Hannah. Hannah, his fiancée." I had no idea he was even dating anyone. My mother practically squealed. "She's beautiful, Marcus. Oh, I just love her already." I sat there, forcing a smile, feeling like an outsider in my own family's celebration. My father poured wine for everyone except me. I was the designated light drinker since I always left early, apparently. Dinner began, and conversation flowed, mostly about Marcus's business. He talked about leasing space, hiring staff, marketing plans. My parents nodded approvingly, hanging on every word. Finally, my mother turned to me. "So, Esme, how's work?" I swallowed. "It's fine. Still managing the front desk at the clinic. I've been saving up again for the bakery idea." She smiled politely, that kind of smile that says I'm pretending to care. "That's nice, dear. But maybe it's time to think about something more stable." Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, not everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur." The air shifted, tension so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. "I guess stability looks different for everyone," I said evenly. "Some people earn it. Some just get handed it." The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat. "Esme, don't start." "I'm not starting," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm just saying, fairness should apply in families too, shouldn't it?" Marcus leaned back, smirking. "You're seriously still hung up on that? It's money, Esme. Get over it." I felt my composure slip. "You don't get to tell me to get over being treated like I don't matter." "Enough," my father barked, slamming his hand on the table. The sound made Hannah flinch. "This is exactly why we can't have a peaceful dinner." I looked around the table, my father glaring, my mother looking embarrassed, Marcus smug, Hannah uncomfortable. And I realized something. This wasn't my family anymore. I stood up. "You're right, Dad. We can't have peace. Because peace requires honesty. And this family doesn't do that." "Where are you going?" my mom asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Home," I said quietly. "To the only place where I'm not constantly reminded that I'm the disappointment." I grabbed my coat and left before anyone could stop me. Outside, the night air was cold, sharp, it bit at my skin, but it felt real, unlike the fake warmth I'd just left behind. As I walked to my car, I could still hear my father's voice echoing from inside. "She always ruins everything." I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. Tears came slowly, then all at once. That dinner didn't just sting, it ended something. On the drive home, I thought about every conversation we'd ever had. Every time they'd told me to be grateful, every time I'd swallowed my feelings to keep the peace. I realized that I'd been trying to earn love from people who only offered it conditionally. And that night, as I finally turned off my phone, I knew those conversations, those carefully worded manipulations, those quiet insults disguised as advice, had burned bridges that might never be rebuilt. But somewhere in the ashes of that silence, a strange calm began to form. It wasn't peace yet. It was something smaller, rawer, the beginning of independence. Because if love had to come with conditions, maybe I didn't need it at all. Silence has a strange way of reshaping your world. For the first few weeks after that dinner, my apartment felt enormous, not because it was big, but because it echoed with everything I'd stopped saying. No more phone calls from my mother checking in, no group texts filled with family updates. My world shrank down to the steady hum of my fridge, the soft tick of the clock above my stove, and the dull city noise filtering in through the curtains. At first, I told myself it was peace, but peace felt different than this. Peace was supposed to be warm. This was hollow. I'd wake up early for work, drive through the same sleepy streets, sit behind the same reception desk, at the clinic, greet patients, smile mechanically. Good morning, how are you today? And then go home to quiet. Dinner was often a slice of toast or something microwaved. I'd eat it on the couch, scrolling through photos of strangers, families, birthdays, dinners, holidays, pretending it didn't bother me. Then one evening, around the start of autumn, I got a message from Hannah. Yes, that Hannah. Marcus's fiancée. Hi, Esme. I hope it's okay I'm reaching out. I know things were tense at dinner, but I just wanted you to know that I think you're really brave. Not everyone stands up for themselves. I stared at the message for a long time. Brave. It wasn't a word I'd ever associated with myself. Stubborn, maybe. Emotional, sure. But brave? No. I typed a short reply. Thanks, Hannah. That means more than you know. She didn't reply after that, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely invisible. The next few months were slow. My world became smaller, but in an odd way, steadier. I started baking again, not for a business, just for me. On weekends, I'd wake up early, tie my hair into a messy bun, and lose myself in flour and sugar. The smell of warm cinnamon filled the apartment like comfort you could touch. I'd set the timer, watch the oven light glow, and for those brief moments, nothing hurt. Sometimes I'd box up the cookies and drop them at the front desk for the nurses at work. They'd light up, Esme, these are amazing. And I'd smile, pretending it didn't mean everything to me. In the evenings, I'd take long walks around the neighborhood. The air always smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. I liked walking past the park where parents pushed kids on swings or couples shared coffee on benches. I wasn't jealous, not exactly, but I did feel something heavy, like I'd been standing outside a window watching everyone else live. It was during one of those walks that I passed by a little shop with a hand-painted sign that read, Corner Crumb Bakery, Help Wanted. I stopped in front of it. Through the window, I could see a small woman with curly hair arranging pastries on trays. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. She looked up and smiled, looking for something sweet or something new. Maybe both, I said. Her name was Marta, and she'd owned that bakery for 20 years. We talked for a while about recipes, small business struggles, the rising price of butter. And before I knew it, I was telling her about my dream bakery idea. She listened without interruption, nodding, eyes kind. Why didn't you do it? She asked finally. I hesitated. I guess I didn't have much support. Marta smiled softly. Then maybe you just needed to find the right kind. She offered me a part-time position on the spot, just mornings, helping with prep and customer service. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something that felt mine. Working at Corner Crumb changed me in quiet ways. Every morning, I'd arrive before sunrise, the smell of coffee already filling the small kitchen. Marta trusted me with the ovens after 2 weeks, a small gesture that felt like a huge vote of confidence. I learned her recipes, added a few of my own, and slowly the customers began asking for my muffins, my bread, my cinnamon rolls. One afternoon, an older customer leaned across the counter and said, "Whoever made this lemon loaf, tell her she's got magic in her hands." Marta grinned and pointed at me. "That's our Esme." That one sentence replayed in my mind all day. Our Esme. It was such a simple phrase, but it felt like belonging. Winter came quickly that year, the kind of cold that seeps through your coat and into your bones. Business slowed down, but Marta kept everyone's spirits up with music and coffee breaks. Sometimes we talk about our families. She told me about her grown son in Chicago. I told her carefully about mine, just enough to explain why Christmas wasn't my favorite time of year anymore. She nodded thoughtfully. "You know," she said one day while rolling dough, "silence doesn't always mean you've lost something. Sometimes it's the space where you start hearing yourself again." That line stayed with me. So, on Christmas Eve, instead of sitting alone in my apartment, I baked. I made boxes of cookies, sugar stars, gingerbread, butter rounds, and left them at the doors of my neighbors, the mailroom, even the security guard's desk. No notes, just ribbons. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. But quiet years aren't always peaceful. A few months later, in early spring, I saw Marcus's name flash across my phone screen. My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard from him in nearly a year. I let it ring out, but he called again. Finally, I answered. "Esme," he said, his voice tired. "Hey, I know you don't really want to talk to me, but I thought you should know Dad's not feeling well." My breath caught. "What do you mean not feeling well?" "He had some kind of heart issue. He's home now. Mom's handling it." The pause between us stretched like a thin wire ready to snap. "Thanks for letting me know," I said softly. "Look," he said, his tone awkward, "I know things got ugly before, but maybe you could call them. It might mean something to Mom." I wanted to say yes, but something in me resisted. I still remembered my father's words, his hand slamming on the table. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. I could have called. I could have texted, but I didn't. Not because I hated them, but because I didn't know how to talk to people who had never listened. Weeks passed, and life slipped back into its quiet rhythm. Work at the bakery became more rewarding. Marta even let me help plan a weekend pop-up stall at the farmer's market. It was a small thing, but it made me feel seen. Every Saturday, I'd set up my table, white cloth, blue chalkboard sign, stacks of muffins and cinnamon twists. I'd watch strangers smile after their first bite, and for a fleeting second, I'd think, maybe this is what healing looks like, people enjoying something I made. One afternoon, a young woman approached the stall, holding her phone out. "Hey, are you Esme? I saw your bakery stuff online. People are posting about it." I blinked. "They are." She nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, someone tagged, #EsmeBakes, said you make the best bread in the county." I laughed, a little stunned. It wasn't fame, not even close, but it was validation. That night, when I got home, I stood in the kitchen surrounded by flour-dusted counters, my hands aching, my feet sore, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of myself without needing anyone else's approval. Spring melted into summer, and the days grew long and golden. The quiet no longer felt empty, it felt earned. I filled it with small joys, trying new recipes, repainting my kitchen, volunteering at the community garden. Sometimes, when I saw families shopping together at the farmer's market, I felt a flicker of sadness. But it was softer now, like a scar, something that used to hurt but didn't define me anymore. And yet, late at night, When the world was still, I'd catch myself thinking about my parents. Did they miss me? Did they ever look at an empty chair at Sunday dinner and think of me? I didn't know. But for the first time, I wasn't desperate to find out. Because in the quiet, I'd learned something powerful. Peace doesn't always come from being forgiven or even from forgiving. Sometimes it comes from simply choosing not to reopen the wound. One evening, Marta closed the bakery early. "You've been running nonstop, Esme," she said. "You need to rest." I laughed. "You sound like my mom." She smiled. "Then I'll take that as a compliment." We sat outside on the little bench by the shop window, watching the sunset stain the sky in pink and gold. Marta sipped her tea and said quietly, the people who can sit with silence without running from it, they're the ones who end up the strongest. I looked at her, then out at the street where the lamps were flickering on. For the first time, I felt that strength, not loud or showy, but steady like roots under soil. By the end of that summer, I'd stopped counting the months since my last conversation with my family. The silence between us no longer hurt. It simply was. The quiet years had changed me. They'd stripped away the noise, the guilt, the endless need for approval, until all that was left was the truth of who I was. And maybe that was the real gift. Not reconciliation, but rediscovery. I did not expect the words to find them. For months, my life had been a steady rhythm of ovens and early mornings, of hands dusted with flour and evenings that ended in silence. The quiet had been a balm. I was learning to be alone without feeling empty. Then one night, after the bakery closed and the last customer left with a paper bag of warm scones, I opened my laptop and wrote a piece that came out of nowhere, raw, honest, and careful. I did not plan to publish it. I only wanted to put the hurt into sentences, so it might stop buzzing in my head. The words surprised me. They sounded less like complaint and more like a map of my life, small incidents drawn in detail that somehow made the pattern obvious. I wrote about waiting in my car after late shifts while Mom and Dad insisted the house was tight on cash. I wrote about the way Dad's voice went flat when he praised Jason. I wrote about how the check showed up in a holiday photo as casually as a smile. I did not name names. I did not add dates. I simply described the way it felt to be invisible to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. When I finished, I read it aloud to the empty bakery. The words tasted like old pennies and fresh cinnamon. Marta, who had stayed behind to close out the register, came over and listened. She did not ask me about my family. Instead, she said, "Write more. People need to hear this." She meant it like dinner, like medicine. She did not push me to hurt anyone. She wanted truth. That night, with the ovens cooling and the shop lights dim, I created an anonymous blog account and posted the piece under a plain title, "A Daughter's Quiet Story." At first, nothing happened. I kept working. I kept my hands moving. Then the next morning, while I was folding dough, Marta dropped a plate gently and said, "Esme, look at this." Her phone showed a thread of comments that had started overnight. A woman in town had shared the post and commented, "This is exactly my family." Then another, "My mother told me the same thing." By afternoon, strangers were writing to the blog directly. They sent messages that were small and aching. "Thank you for saying this." I cried in my car. "It's like you were telling my story." I felt strange reading them. My chest was hollow and swollen at the same time. Seeing strangers' replies made the hurt feel less like a private wound and more like a common ache. People began to share the link on Facebook and Twitter. Someone started a hashtag that caught on. #InvisibleChild. The numbers were small at first, a few dozens, then hundreds, but they grew steadily, like the first customers at a Sunday market. News travels fast in a small town. Within days, Someone at church mentioned the blog in a message over coffee. A neighbor's cousin brought it up at the library. My parents were not on social media much, but word came back to me the way small towns tell secrets, through other people with the applause of gossip trailing behind. At first I told myself it would only ripple a few sympathetic messages, and then fade. I never expected how sharply the sound would cut through their life. One Sunday afternoon, out of habit more than design, Dad called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in his voice, a directness I hadn't heard in months, made me answer. He sounded short, clipped. "Esme," he said, "did you write something online about us?" I felt the floor shift. My hands were needing air. I had not told anyone at the bakery. Marta had not said a word to her regulars about the author, but there was a tone in his question that told me the post had reached him. He did not say "I'm worried" or "I'm sorry." He said, "Did you do this?" As if a thing I might have done was a crime. I swallowed. Why would you ask me that? I kept my voice steady. I wanted to test him. I wanted to know if he could be honest. There was a long pause. I could picture his hand on the steering wheel, knuckles white, the TV muted in the background. Finally, he said, "Someone from the church told us. There are details in it, details that sound like things only family would know." A small tightness hit my chest. It was the moment I had worried about without naming it. "If the details sound like family," I said slowly, "maybe that should make you think." His reply was what I expected. Defensiveness. "You tore us apart in front of people," he said. "You humiliated us." Humiliated. The word landed like gravel. I wanted to list every morning I had paid my own bills, every birthday I'd spent smiling while they praised Jason. I wanted to say that humiliation had been on the other side for years. But I did not. I had learned a kind of strength in the quiet months, answers that did not feed the heat of an argument, words that cooled things down. I didn't set out to humiliate anyone, I said. I set out to tell the truth. That night, the calls started, not just to me, to tenants, to old neighbors, to anyone they thought might know. Someone printed the blog and handed it to church leaders. A small local website, one that reported on town board meetings and bake sales, picked it up with a headline that read, "Local Voice Sparks Family Talk Online." The piece quoted parts of the anonymous post and included a photograph of a family dinner table, a stock photo, but it felt pointed. I watched all of this in a slow-motion kind of disbelief. The bakery was suddenly busier. People spoke in low tones. Some customers asked quietly if it was me. Others spoke with a sympathy that felt like a hand on my shoulder. A few said cruel things. The town split in a way I had not predicted. Some took offense on my behalf. Some took offense on my parents. The interesting thing was how many people reached out to me via private messages, telling me their own stories. Someone sent a scanned image of an old letter they'd written to a sibling years ago. Another left a voicemail, their voice thick. My mother wrote me out of the will for saying similar things. "I'm so glad you said it first." In the middle of that noise, my parents became quieter. They stopped going to the senior card group they led. Invitations slowed. My mother, usually the first to send a casserole when someone was sick, stopped offering recipes at the monthly church choir supper. When she did come out, neighbors looked at her differently. Their pity was thinly veiled as judgment. Then came the confrontation I had known might happen in some form. My mother showed up at the bakery on a rainy Thursday. I was finishing a tray of cookies, my hands still warm. When she stepped inside, there was no makeup on her face. Her eyes were red, not from crying, I thought, but from exertion. She held a paper in her hand, a printout of the blog. "Esme," she said quietly. The word hung there, small and surprised. Her voice had that old tiredness in it. I placed the tray to cool and wiped my hands. Marta touched my arm and stepped away. Giving us space like the shop itself was honoring a line it did not want crossed. "Are you responsible for this?" she asked. I did not lie. I could have easily. The power of anonymity pulled at me like a magnet, but anonymity had also been a shield when I was small. Now that I had a name, it felt different. I had to choose how to hold it. It was me. I said the words calm. I watched as the paper crumpled slightly in her grip. Her first reaction was not anger. It was something else. A look of bewilderment, like a person who had been trying to read a map upside down for years and finally turned it the right way. "Esme," she said again, softer, "why would you write all of that?" I remembered the nights when I'd gone to bed with a cramped stomach from swallowing things I wanted to say. I remembered asking for a few $100s once to fix my car and being told they were saving. I remembered the way Dad's voice smoothed when Jason said he had a plan. I could list these things, but listing would not make her feel what I felt. So I described a single moment, small and concrete, the time Dad kept looking out the window during my high school graduation, checking the mailbox as if he expected something other than me. That memory was true, and it spoke louder than any accusation. She looked at me and said, "You should have come to us. You should have said how you felt." That line had been used against me more than once. This time, it landed and held. "I tried," I said. "I tried to tell you in different ways, and it didn't change. I thought if people could read it, maybe they would understand. Maybe you would, too." Her hands trembled. "Do you realize how this looks? People are talking. Your father is angry. Jason is—" She stopped breathless. She did not finish the sentence. She could not figure out how to put a son's embarrassment into words. "I know how it looks," I said. "I also know how it feels to be the one who keeps giving without getting seen." I kept my voice low. I did not want to make a scene in Marta's shop. The customers were listening now, the milk steaming in quiet bowls. She sat on a crate behind the counter, the paper still in her hand. For a moment, she looked like the woman who had once held me as a child when I woke from nightmares. I had dreamed of that version of her many times in quiet hours. It was not there now, replaced by a person who had been startled awake by something in public she could not control. After she left, I thought the worst might be over. Instead, the events moved faster. Jason posted a defensive message on social media, calling the blog a bitter and anonymous attack, and insisting it contained inaccuracies. He accused someone of trying to tarnish the family name. That did not stop the conversation. If anything, it made more people read the piece. The local site ran a follow-up story with quotes from strangers who had felt the same way. A radio talk show in the neighboring county invited a caller who said she lost contact with her sister over something similar. The more the family tried to control the message, the wider the thread spread. It was as if once a truth is set loose in a small place, it rolls down streets and finds pockets of similar truths to join. There were ugly moments, too. Anonymous messages came to the blog, angry, cruel. A man I had once smiled at in church said, in a private comment, "You should be ashamed for airing family laundry." Another post suggested I had ulterior motives. Those hurt in a way that surprised me. I expected the sting from my family. I did not expect strangers to feel they had ownership over my hurt. At work, I started receiving letters. One was from a woman in Ohio who wrote in careful handwriting, "Your words gave me courage to leave a house that had loved me conditionally. Thank you." Another was a printed-out text from a teenage girl who said she felt like her parents favored her brother, too, and that reading my piece made her feel less alone. Those small notes were like warm towels after a long swim. They kept me steady when the town's gossip tried to sway me. The hardest part came when my mother's friends began to avoid me at the post office And when the church treasurer asked to speak privately with Marta, there were whispers of meetings in the Sunday school room about family matters and community unity. I was not invited. That felt like the old pattern. Decisions made without my presence about things that directly affected me. One evening, when the bakery had closed and the rain pressed its forehead against the glass, my phone vibrated with a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. I pressed play. It was my father. "Esme," he said, voice low, we're hurting. People are asking questions. I don't know how to fix this." There was a crack in his voice I had not expected to hear. It was not pride or anger. It was confusion. "Then maybe this is a start," I said. My answer was not a victory speech. It was a gentle suggestion, a hand to a wound that had been kept wrapped too tightly for too long. There was silence. Then, "I don't know how to talk about it without making it worse." "Talk like you mean it," I said. "Ask people what they noticed. Listen without defending. That's all I ever wanted." We did not agree on much after that call. He never apologized in a way that mended things. My mother sent a text the next day. "We never meant to hurt you. We thought we were helping." It read like something someone might say when they had been caught in a mistake, but still felt entitled to their decision. The town began to shift. My parents' social circle narrowed. Invitations decreased. There were quiet, awkward moments when I ran into someone who had once hugged my mother and now kept their distance. I watched my parents stumble through questions they had never asked themselves before. They were not publicly shamed in a dramatic way. That's not how our town worked. Rather, it was a slow cooling, like milk left on the counter. In the end, I did not seek vengeance. I did not publish every private detail I'd kept locked in my drawers. I did not write with the intention of breaking them down. I wrote because the silence was a weight. The truth, unleashed into the neighborhood, did what truth sometimes does. It forced faces to change, to look a little more inward, to notice small things they had been skilled at ignoring. As the days passed, I received messages from my parents that were quieter than I had expected and rougher than I wanted. They ranged from hollow apologies to practical questions about family matters. I answered a few, the ones that needed practical replies. Mail, the name of the plumber. The calls that demanded my emotional labor were left unanswered. I had found that taking care of myself did not mean I hated them. It meant I protected the fragile new things inside me. And when the town's chatter finally settled into a new rhythm, the blog did something I had not intended. It gave other people a vocabulary. Neighbors who had ached in silence found a place to say, "Me too." A woman from the next county wrote that she had been given the courage to speak up at a PTA meeting. A man wrote that he had finally told his mother he had been hurt. These ripples were not loud. They were small, but they were steady. One evening, long after the post that changed everything, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of tea and watched the steam rise. Marta had brought me a slice of lemon loaf and pressed it into my hand before closing time. I scrolled through the latest comments and messages. Most were gentle now. Some people had moved on. Some grudges remained. That was the nature of towns and families and the way people wear memory. There were no fireworks, no dramatic courtroom revelations. The truth did not annihilate my parents. It made them human in a way that anger had not. They began to speak less in public and more haltingly at home. Whether that speaking would ever lead to change remained to be seen. For me, the important thing was the light that came back into my life. It was not their light. It was mine. When the dust settled enough for me to breathe without thinking of fences and whispers, I logged into the blog and wrote one more short piece. Not to strike, not to shame, but to close a small circle. I wrote about the odd piece of being seen by strangers, of the kindness of people who sent recipes and letters. I wrote about the strange safety of silence, now chosen rather than imposed. I kept it anonymous. For the first time since that first post, I felt the anonymity like armor and like a soft cloth on an old bruise. I did not unmask myself. That choice was mine, and for now, I still liked it that way. The truth had found them. It had moved through the town like an unexpected wind. It made some doors creak open and others close. It did not fix everything, but it shifted the air in the house where I grew up. And sometimes a shift in the air is the start of something less loud but more lasting. The night after that final confrontation with my parents, the silence in my apartment felt different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of regret. It was still fragile and oddly peaceful. I sat on the couch, the TV flickering quietly in the background, but I wasn't really watching. My thoughts were scattered between old memories and the raw ache that had started to soften somewhere inside me. For years, I thought closure would come with words, an apology, a confession, maybe even a tearful reconciliation. But as I stared at my phone, screen dimly glowing with no new messages, I realized that sometimes closure isn't something someone gives you. Sometimes it's something you decide to take back for yourself. The letter I never sent. 2 days later, I opened my laptop and started typing a letter. Not an email, an actual letter. I began it the way I used to start essays in high school. Dear Mom and Dad. The words looked foreign on the screen. I wrote about everything. The dinners I wasn't invited to, the holidays spent alone, the $230,000 secret that split my family like glass cracking underweight. But the deeper I wrote, the less it felt like I was writing to them. It felt like I was writing to the version of myself that kept waiting for them to choose me. You taught me to earn love, I typed, but I finally learned it's not something you should have to fight for. By the time I finished, it wasn't a letter of anger anymore. It was a release. I printed it, folded it neatly, and placed it inside a small box along with a few old photos, ones where we actually looked like a family. Then I closed the lid. I never mailed it. A call from home. A week later, my phone rang with a familiar number. My heart hesitated before my mind could. I almost didn't answer, but something in me knew I had to. It was my brother, Liam. His voice was different, tired, heavy. Esme, he said softly, Mom's not doing too well. There was a long pause. I could hear faint hospital sounds in the background. My heart clenched even though my walls went up immediately. What happened? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Her heart. It's not serious yet, but they said she needs to rest. Dad's been worried. They've both been asking about you. I didn't know what to say. For a second, I hated how easily those words, asking about you, still had power over me. He continued, I think they realize they messed up, yes. They just don't know how to say it. A lump formed in my throat. I didn't trust hope anymore, not when it came from them. I'll think about it, I finally said. I get it, Liam replied quietly. But if you decide to come, you should know Dad sold the house. They're moving into a smaller place. Said it doesn't feel like home anymore. That line stayed with me long after we hung up. The drive I almost didn't take. For 3 nights, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, memories looped like an old film reel. The fights, the silence, the day I stopped calling them. By the 4th morning, I packed a small bag and got in my car. The drive back to my hometown was long and painfully familiar. Every gas station, every diner, every billboard felt like a piece of a life I'd quietly buried. When I reached the hospital, I sat in the parking lot for nearly 20 minutes watching people walk in and out. Some carried flowers, others carried worry. I carried confusion. I finally went inside, clutching a coffee cup I didn't even want. When I stepped into the hospital room, Mom looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was gray at the edges now, and her eyes, usually sharp and unyielding, looked soft, almost frightened. Dad was sitting by the window, staring at the floor. The moment she saw me, her lips parted in disbelief. "Esme," she whispered. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. It had been years since we'd spoken, but all of that time condensed into one fragile second. "I heard you weren't feeling well," I said quietly. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I didn't think you'd come." I almost didn't. The next few minutes were slow, like time itself didn't want to intrude. The nurse adjusted her for, the machines hummed softly, and I just stood there, halfway between anger and forgiveness. Dad finally spoke. His voice was lower than I remembered, softer too. "We made mistakes, Esme, more than I can count." I didn't respond. My fingers tightened around the paper coffee cup. He continued, "We thought we were doing what was best, helping your brother start his life. We didn't think," his voice cracked, "we didn't think about what that would do to you." For years, I dreamed about hearing those words. Now that I did, they didn't feel like victory. They felt like loss. Mom reached out a trembling hand. I wish I could take it back. Something inside me broke then, not in anger, but in understanding. I realized they weren't the villains I'd built in my head. They were just people, flawed, scared, and too proud to admit they'd hurt their daughter. I took her hand gently. "You can't take it back," I said softly. "But maybe we can start different." She smiled weakly. "I'd like that." Closure that came quietly. Over the next few days, I stayed nearby. I didn't move back into their lives completely, but I visited daily. We didn't talk about money or the past. Instead, we talked about small things, Mom's favorite recipes, the neighbors who'd moved away, the old maple tree in our yard that still stood tall. Each visit felt like rewiring something broken inside me. Not perfectly, but enough to feel human again. Liam came one afternoon, holding a box. "I think this belongs to you," he said, handing it over. Inside were some of my childhood things, my old locket, a few drawings, and a card from my 10th birthday. But tucked beneath them was something I didn't expect. A check. It wasn't for $230,000. It was for $5,000, signed by Dad. The note attached read, "For what we owe you, even if money will never cover it." I didn't cash it. Instead, I framed the note, not because of the money, but because it meant they finally saw me. The goodbye that wasn't spoken. A few months later, I got a call from Liam again. Mom had passed peacefully in her sleep. My first reaction wasn't shock. It was a quiet ache that spread slowly through my chest. At the funeral, the sky was gray, and the air smelled faintly of rain. People whispered condolences, but I barely heard them. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't have a speech prepared. I just stood there, looking at her photo. I never got to say goodbye. I began, voice trembling. But maybe that's okay, because in the end, I think she already knew. The wind picked up softly, rustling the flowers on her casket. After everyone left, I stayed for a while. Dad walked over, his shoulders heavy, his eyes tired. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I think she would have wanted it this way." I replied. He nodded. "I know we can't fix everything, but I want to try." I smiled faintly. Trying's a good place to start. As he walked away, I whispered the words I never said aloud. "I forgive you." And maybe that was the real goodbye, the one that didn't need to be spoken. Epilogue. Months later, back in my apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Life had moved forward, not dramatically, just quietly, like a river finding a new path. The framed note from my father hung on the wall beside a photo of Mom from years ago. Every morning, I looked at it as a reminder that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pain. I didn't start calling them again, not every day at least. But when Dad sent a message on Christmas, just a simple thinking of you, I replied. It wasn't a grand reunion. It wasn't closure in the storybook sense, but it was enough. Because sometimes the most powerful goodbye is the one that lives quietly in your heart, unspoken but understood. The night settled with the weight of everything unsaid. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the words they couldn't speak, of apologies stitched into glances and forgiveness hidden in trembling smiles. As the last light flickered out and the hum of the city faded beyond the window, she realized goodbyes didn't always need to be spoken aloud. Some were carried in the heart, unfinished, unbroken, and eternal, echoing softly in the spaces where love once lived.